Workers' Day is celebrated the world over every year, but here in South Africa, the voices of labour are not celebrating. Workers complain that the gains made by ordinary workers since independence are fast going backwards, and there's self-introspection going on about the need for the workers' movements to be more united than it currently is, and a serious discussion is being had about the de-politicisation of unions, with some calling for the tripartite alliance between the ANC, COSATU and SACP to be broken. Now let's discuss this further. We're joined via Zoom by Andrew Levy. He's a labour market analyst. Mr. Levy, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Let's first get your reaction to ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa being whisked away in a police inyala at the May Day rally yesterday. Now, of course, this is not the first time an ANC president was booed away. In 2017, in fact, former ANC and State President Jacob Zuma was chased away from COSATU's Workers' Day rally in Bloemfontein. But your reaction to what we saw yesterday?
You know, I think we need to take a step back and see this in context. You know, certainly the workers at Sibanye-Stillwater are angry and frustrated. They've been on strike for 3 months. They are not going to get what they are demanding. This is a strike that they will not win. The one thing we know about strikes is that all strikes come to an end sooner or later, and that they end with compromises. And I don't see any compromises forthcoming from the union side. So clearly they will put whatever pressure they can, whenever they can. And I think that putting the state president in front of them may have been an error. But equally, I have no doubt that there was a degree of organization behind it. Now, we need to remember that in South Africa, we do have a democratic right to protest, and we have freedom of expression. And up to the point where it does not result in any form of actual intimidation or actual harm, then in point of fact, the workers' anger is quite understandable. The real tragedy is that there is no perception that their demands are unattainable. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. What I will say is that just over 3 years ago, there was a very similar strike at Sibanye-Stillwater, which involved AMCU, also with demands which were unaffordable. The strike went about 3 months and the workers came back with little or nothing to show from it. So one would have thought that you know, perhaps there would have been a finer understanding. And I now want to talk or turn to some of the points the previous speaker made. And I think we need to be careful with these broad generalizations. And of course, the gentleman was from the SACP and then obviously is towing a party line and putting a party spin on things. But let's just clarify one thing. The CEO, Neil Froneman, is not remunerated at 300 million rand a year. That is just not true. Now, in point of fact, what happens with most CEO pay, and we need to also distinguish that the market for CEOs is not the same market for unskilled or semi-skilled or even skilled labor. It's an international market where demand exceeds supply. But all of these executives earn a certain amount, and then there is a portion up to 40 or 50%, which is dependent on their achieving certain growth bonuses for the company. So let's say, for argument's sake, that Mr. Froneman earns 12 million a year, which is a great deal of money, but it's not out of kilter. And if he reaches his target, he might get another 4, 5, or even 6 million, taking him up to 18, 19, 20 million. I'm not saying for one moment that that is not a great deal of money, and that workers can look at this and obviously feel frustrated. But Mr. Froneman's real wealth does not come from his remuneration. It comes from his ownership of shares in the company. So the balance between whatever he earns by way of remuneration and the 300 million, which may or may not be the correct figure, I don't know, will come from the fact that he has invested time, trouble, etc., These are his returns. Now, you know, we can turn around and say, well, the returns are too great. And if I was a member of the SACP, that's exactly what I would say. But I think one needs to understand that it's not a fair and a reasonable comparison. Now, if we turn to the actual miners themselves, let's deal with the question of, are miners badly paid? Now, the thing we need to look at there is the fact that everybody always wants more. I do, you do, miners do, workers in restaurants do. It's the normal human condition. It's quite understandable. But, you need to look at wages not as they are for one position. You need to look at them in comparison. Now, the average wage in mining is around about 16,000 Rand a month. Now, the point that I want to make is that the minimum wage in South Africa is just over 4,000 Rand a month. So in other words, the miners, and no one disputes that their work is dark and deep and dangerous, but they earn 4 times the national minimum wage. Now, remember that the national minimum wage is set at 48% of the median wage in South Africa, which means that nearly 50% of people in South Africa earn less than 4,000 Rand or at 4,000 Rand. So, relatively speaking, the miners are amongst the better paid. Now, the real inequality of distribution is not between the oligarchs, as they were called by the last speaker, or between the owners of capital. It's between those who work and have jobs and those who have no jobs and have no prospect of getting jobs. And there I would agree with the last speaker when he says that unemployment is the heart of our problem. And at the end of the day, unless we grow the economy, we are not going to deal with unemployment. So I think, to sum up what has been rather a lengthy diatribe on my part here, is that understandably the workers want to demonstrate, they want to create pressure, get publicity, get sympathy wherever they can. Yesterday was an opportunity. Had I been advising the state president, I would have suggested perhaps that he did not go. Let's send the Minister of Labour or something like that. But at the end of the day, if his safety was on the line, then they were right to whisk him away. From my reading and understanding, and clearly I was not there, it had not got to the stage where the state president was physically threatened. And that, of course, would have been an awful thing, but not because he's the state president, simply because any form of violence and injury and intimidation and indeed murder is not an acceptable path in labour relations, and it's not acceptable for us as South Africans.
All right, Mr. Levy, thank you so much for that very comprehensive response to that question. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. And thank you and the listeners, and we'll talk again. Thank you so much.